Alright, friends. If you, like me, are obsessed with the history of technology, if the fate of the iron monsters of the past, their triumphs and failures, captivates you, you've come to the right place. Get comfortable. Today, you and I are going on an incredible journey, not just into the past, but right into the epicenter of one of the greatest dramas of World War II, the battlefields of the Eastern Front. And the main character of this drama won't be a man, but a machine. A machine that was supposed to become a terror for the enemy, but instead became a symbol of a tragic misunderstanding, a symbol of how brilliant engineering thought can shatter against the harsh reality of war. This is the story of a tank that arrived too late, a tank that came to the wrong place, the story of the Cromwell Mark IV in the Soviet Union. If you're ready to find out how the British race car and armor clashed with the Russian Steppe, German Tigers, and the iron logic of the Red Army, scroll down, smash that like button, and subscribe to the channel. And at the end, we're waiting for your heated comments. What do you think about such would-be heroes of the war? Let's dive in. Imagine the autumn of 1944. The war is on its last legs, but its breath is still as hot as a blast furnace. Soviet troops are driving the enemy westwards. Operation Bag Ration has already thundered, and the Red Army is no longer that battered, retreating force of 41. It is a colossal, well-oiled military machine with its own habits, its own logic, its own, now blood-earned and battle-tested, doctrine. And at this very moment, when everyone had long since understood how and with what to fight, a batch of exotic beasts arrives via Lend-Lease, through the northern seas, to the ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, Cromwell Mark IV tanks. To understand the full depth of this culture shock, we need to step back a bit further into history and economics. What was Great Britain in the mid-century? It was an empire losing its colonies, but still a mighty industrial power. Its tank building grew from a completely unique environment. On one hand, a powerful automotive and aviation industry, think Rolls-Royce. On the other, centuries-old traditions of shipbuilding and, crucially, railway carriage building. Yes, you heard right. The company that became one of the main creators of the Cromwell, the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, was a giant in producing railway wagons. And its engineers thought in terms of frames, rivets, and armored plates that needed to be bolted to a sturdy skeleton. This was a philosophy of reliability and maintainability in the conditions of well-equipped factory depots. How do you repair a carriage? Dismantle the damaged section and install a new one. Sounds logical, right? Now let's sharply change the scene. The Soviet Union, a country that, in just a few 5-year plans, made an incredible industrial leap, but that leap was aimed at one thing: mass production and simplicity. The slogan, simpler, cheaper, more, hung in the air of every design bureau. Take the legendary T-34. Its genius lies in its manufacturability. A cast turret pancake, rolled armor plates welded at rational angles, a diesel engine that runs on anything. This is a peasant tank, a soldier's tank. It could be produced on a tractor factory assembly line, repaired in field conditions with a sledgehammer and a welding torch, and its crews didn't need a university education to master it. This was the philosophy of a people's war, a total war, where the count was in tens of thousands of machines. And so, the Cromwell arrives at the proving grounds in Kubinka, this tank court. Soviet engineers and officers, hardened in the crucible of the Battle of Kursk, look at it and can't believe their eyes. Before them stands, without a doubt, a beautiful, sleek, even elegant tank. But the construction of its hull and turret, to them, is a museum exhibit. 13mm steel angle bars forming a frame, to which armor plates are attached with bolts. In 1944, when the whole world had already switched to fully welded hulls. For Soviet specialists, this was like seeing a modern fighter jet riveted together like a World War I biplane. It was perceived not just as archaic, but as a structural heresy. Why? Let's break down how the two main consequences of this carriage scheme looked in the eyes of a man from the Eastern Front. First, field maintainability. Imagine a shell fragment or a non-penetrating armor-piercing round hits the side plate of your Cromwell. The plate is dented, there's a hole. In a T-34, a repair crew arrives with a welding torch, cuts out the damaged piece, welds on a patch, and the tank is back in action in a few hours. But what about the Cromwell? To replace a plate, you need to unscrew dozens, if not hundreds, of bolts. But many of them are inside, their access blocked by other components, by the frame itself. Essentially, it requires a partial disassembly of the tank's very skeleton. This isn't a field repair shop. This is already a major overhaul at a stationary factory. In the conditions of a war of mobility, where divisions covered hundreds of kilometers and rear services barely kept up, such a machine was doomed to become a mobile liability as soon as it sustained its first serious damage. Second, survivability in combat. It might seem a bolt is a small thing, but in the world of tanks, there are no small things. Imagine the powerful shockwave from a shell explosion, even one that didn't penetrate the armor. A fully welded hull shakes but holds together as a single unit. In a frame and bolt construction, this energy looks for weak points, and it finds them in the connections. Bolts can shear, riveted seams can split. History knows of cases where, from nearby explosions, Cromwells literally had entire armor plates torn off. And those very large external bolts on the turret that the Soviet testers frowned upon? They are ready-made initiators. Upon impact, a shell meeting such a hard point is more likely to dig into the armor rather than deflect, concentrating all its energy on a tiny area. This weakened the already not-so-powerful armor. And here we come to the main internal contradiction of the Cromwell, which the Soviet specialists immediately identified. Its heart. That's an engineering marvel. The Meteor engine, it's essentially a derated aircraft Merlin engine, the same one that powered Spitfire and Hurricane fighters. 600 horsepower. On paper, this gave phenomenal power-to-weight ratio and a road speed of up to 52 kilometers per hour. The Cromwell was one of the fastest production tanks of the war. Sounds amazing, right? A sprinter tank, a raider tank. But war is not a racetrack. It's mud, snow, off-road terrain. Fields turn to quagmire after rain. And here the terrifying indicator for RKKA logisticians came into play. The wild appetite of this meteor. Cross-country, the Cromwell could devour up to 370 liters of gasoline per 100 kilometers. For comparison, the T-34 with its diesel, more torquey and less thirsty engine, consumed about 170. Think about that difference. More than double. What did this mean on an operational level? By the end of the war, the Red Army masterfully conducted deep offensive operations. Tank corps and armies would break through and dash hundreds of kilometers deep, breaking away from infantry and supply bases. Their success depended on two things: the reliability of the equipment and fuel efficiency. Fuel was delivered in tankers, which themselves got stuck on muddy roads. Every drop counted. And here appears a tank that needs nearly 800 liters of fuel for a 200-kilometer march, while a T-34 would get by with 350. This is not a maneuverable tank. This is a liability chained to a fuel truck. Its superpower, speed, couldn't be realized simply because there was no physical way to supply its voracious metabolism with fuel under the conditions of deep raids. But let's say we somehow solved the logistical problem. How does the Cromwell fare in combat? And here the picture was contradictory. Its gun, the 75mm Mk.V, was an excellent piece. During tests, it confidently penetrated the side of a German Tiger from 600 meters, a more than decent range. This was a serious argument. However, here too its carriage past and overall concept played a cruel joke. The Cromwell's turret was cramped. Very cramped. Its turret ring diameter was only 1,524 millimeters. The T-34-85 had 1,600. It might seem a difference of 7.5 centimeters is nothing. But inside the confined space of a tank, it's a chasm. The loader in the Cromwell worked in conditions of extreme tightness. The main ammunition stowage was positioned such that accessing the shells often required using knees, elbows, or even asking other crew members for help. As a result, the rate of fire suffered. The tank could make an accurate first shot, but in a prolonged duel, in the firestorm of battle where seconds count, it would inevitably lose to more spacious and well-thought-out machines. It was a sniper deprived of the ability for rapid fire. And so we come to the key comparison that sealed the fate of the Cromwell in the USSR. It was inevitably compared not only to the domestic T-34-85, but to another Lend-Lease tank, the American M4A2 Sherman, especially in the variant with the long-barreled 76mm gun. By the end of 44 and the beginning of 45, the Sherman had become the workhorse of Allied supplies for the Red Army. And in terms of combined parameters, the Cromwell lost to it on virtually all counts. The American tank had a fully welded hull with rational armor slopes, simpler to produce and repair than the British frame construction. Its engines, often diesel, were far less thirsty. Its road range was comparable, and cross-country it was better. But the main thing, logistics. Entire fleets of Shermans had already been established at the front. Supply chains for spare parts had been set up, crews and mechanics had been trained. Introducing another type of tank with a completely different, complex design, a ravenous appetite for gasoline, and scarce spare parts was strategically pointless. The Sherman, by that time, was proven, tested, and integrated into the system. The Cromwell was an exotic and capricious guest. The final, fatal argument was the firing trial's results. When a Cromwell hull was set up on the range and began to be shot at with a captured German gun, the long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 from a Panther, all doubts vanished. The armor was penetrated from any practical combat range. No safe zones where a shell might ricochet. This meant one thing: an encounter with the main German heavy tank of the late war period was fatal for the Cromwell. Could not survive a duel with a Panther. And yet, precisely fighting such enemy machines was the primary tactical task for Soviet tankers in 44 and 45. And here we come to the very essence of the drama. The Cromwell was created within the framework of the British doctrine, which clearly separated infantry tanks, like the Churchill, slow but thick-skinned, and cruiser tanks, fast, for breakthroughs and raids. The Cromwell was the pinnacle of the cruiser line. But on the Eastern Front, by the end of the war, such a doctrine was dead. The war had become total. A tank had to be a universal soldier, to support infantry, to burst into a breakthrough, and to accept battle with a heavy opponent. It had to be technological, survivable, with a good balance of protection, firepower, and, critically, autonomy. The Cromwell, with its speed but weak armor, high logistical demands, and complex construction, did not fit into this worldview. Thus, the fate of the Cromwell Mark IV in the USSR is not a story about a bad tank. It is a tragedy of mismatched contexts. It is the story of how a machine created for one war, the presumed maneuver battles in Western Europe, ended up in the crucible of another, a brutal, large-scale, demanding war of attrition on the vast expanses of the East. It was a fine tool, but not for this job. Its engineering finesse, its aviation heart, shattered against the simple, hammer-like demands of the Eastern Front reality. Simplicity, survivability, maintainability, and autonomy. It arrived too late, came to the wrong country, and therefore, having gone through all the trials at Kubinka, it never made it to the front as part of Soviet tank brigades, remaining in history as a curious, but useless for the Red Army, artifact of foreign military thought. So there you have it, friends. A story about how in war, it's not just technology that wins, but technology born at the right time, in the right place, and for the right tasks. The Cromwell is a monument to what happens when these conditions don't align. So what do you think? Could the Cromwell have performed better in other conditions? Maybe in Normandy or North Africa its qualities would have been more in demand. Or were its flaws fatal for any theater of war? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's debate. Be sure to hit that like button if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. We have many more such stories about forgotten, strange, and amazing weapons that changed or tried to change the course of history. Until next time.